In 1997, Peter Jackson set out to adapt J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings trilogy, and in the process created what is arguably the most realized universe ever committed to film. Now, Lord of the Rings was an incredibly influential series, with groundbreaking visual effects and awe-inspiring battle sequences. However, what distinguished Lord of the Rings the most was its world building. You can break down the film's world building into two categories: history and culture. The history provides the details, and the culture provides the context. Let's begin with history. Throughout The Lord of the Rings, characters are constantly telling stories and recapping old events. In fact, the first 20 minutes of Fellowship can be considered purely expositional. Exposition can be boring, and in film criticism it is often looked down upon. It's judged by its efficiency or by how little it interferes with the story we're telling. Peter Jackson doesn't do this, mainly because he understands that these small details are the most important elements of Middle-earth. Now, if you're going to cover this amount of detail, you have to be inventive. Details for the sake of details is tedious. They have to serve a higher function. Take the voiceover by Galadriel that starts the trilogy. Before we ever see any visuals in Middle-earth, we hear Elvish, which is then translated into English.
The world is changed.
This signals to us that what we are hearing, what we are about to see, is foreign, and it's not of this world.
I feel it in the earth.
After we are given the Cliff Notes summary of Middle-earth, we transition into the Shire. From here, we are introduced to Bilbo Baggins as he writes his novel There and Back Again, which covers the events of The Hobbit. Throughout Fellowship, characters continuously make references to these events. Bilbo even retells the iconic chapter involving the three trolls. Now, these stories are great, and they are needed since they provide lots of context, but things really start to get interesting in this scene. We are in the thick of our new adventure, and our leads are in trouble as Frodo has just been stabbed. However, we are reminded of these older stories when our leads encounter the troll statues from Bilbo's adventures. Now, this is really important for two reasons. For one, it provides a nice contrast between the joy of Bilbo's adventures with the horrors of Frodo's, a theme that will be very prominent going forward. It also acts as a marking for Bilbo's adventures, that these tales left an impact on the world. We are no longer being told about this world, we are discovering it for ourselves. This happens again with the Shards of Narsil. In this scene, not only do we re-establish the importance and history of this sword, but we also learn everything we need to know about these two characters. Everything, from their arcs to their personality, is presented by their interactions with the sword. Not only do these objects inform us on the characters in their world, but they also personify the film's struggles. The most obvious example would be the One Ring. Now, if you were to take one thing away from Lord of the Rings, it should be that destroying the One Ring is no easy task.
One does not simply walk into Mordor.
Throughout the trilogy, characters constantly refer to this as a heavy burden. However, the film also takes this literally, to the point where the ring is so heavy that it actually causes friction burns on Frodo's neck. Another example would be Aragorn's sword, Anduril. Not only does this figuratively make him king, but it also literally does so to the point where it gives him magical ghost powers. Keeping on the subject of swords, in Lord of the Rings, a character's strength is often linked to the relationship with their sword. Consider this moment from The Two Towers.
Fingers would remember their own strength better if they grasped your sword.
This dynamic doesn't just concern kings and lords, it considers the common soldier.
This is a good sword.
This may be a small moment, but it speaks volumes on Aragorn's faith in men. These objects can also portray weakness. Consider Rohan and Gondor. When we are introduced to these realms, both are in a state of peril and frailty, and the film punctuates this with two artifacts. With Rohan, it's the flag falling from its pole, and with Gondor, it's the state of the White Tree. Both visually show a precious artifact stripped of its former glory. Another interesting aspect is how we link the fate of characters with objects, like how our characters learn of Boromir's death. Or how they think they learned of Frodo's. Why this is so important should be pretty obvious. With each film, Frodo is more tied to the ring, and with the whole journey hinging on the object's destruction, this causes tension for the fate of Frodo's life.
I've rationed it. There should be enough. For what? The journey home.
up until this point, we have covered many aspects of culture: weapons, jewelry, monuments, decorations, but there is one aspect that is most important of all.
Aragorn! Let's find some food.
Food is one of the greatest ways to understanding a culture. I first discovered this with Goodfellas. With Lord of the Rings, a good chunk of time is spent understanding the catering needs of hobbits.
Yes. What about second breakfast?
A lot of this is to sell the connection to the Shire, and also pay off this really important character beat in Return of the King.
Do you remember the taste of strawberries?
No, Sam. I can't recall the taste of food. No, the sound of water. The touch of grass. Naked in the dark.
But just like everything else, how the food is used as a storytelling device is incredibly inventive and effective. There's the obvious clash between Sam and Smeagol, reflected in their cooking sensibilities.
What's it doing? Stupid fat hobbit.
There's this small moment in The Two Towers that plays like a one-off gag, but when considering Éowyn's arc, it actually provides a lot of context. And then there's this scene, which is undeniably my favorite scene in the entire trilogy.
Can you sing, Master Hobbit?
We have another aspect of culture brought into the mix: music.
Come, sing me a song.
You can break this scene down into 3 elements: Pippin singing his song, Denethor eating his meal, and Faramir riding to battle. Pippin provides the rhythm, for that's the only thing he can do. He's entirely powerless in this scenario, and all he can do is reflect.
Miss behind the world ahead.
Then we add Faramir and his cavalry, whose stampede matches the rhythm of the song, as though he follows the rhythm given to him. Then we add the third part. These moments happen quick and are very aggressive. They're disorienting, and most importantly, they break the rhythm. They break the peace. These 3 elements build until the song crescendos, the orcs fire the arrows at Faramir, and then this. At this point, I think you'll realize that this is about more than history and culture. It's about characters and stories and the impacts that they had on their world. And for every artifact, for every person whose stories were told, there are thousands of others that are left blank, that have such fine details at the point where I think,
That belongs in a museum!
Now I could say that these stories are left to the imagination, but that's simply not the case, and they lead me to what I think is perhaps the greatest achievement in the entire trilogy: that film is art. It's a part of history, it's a part of culture, and film can preserve the stories that come before it. For our characters, the art is there to preserve the adventures they've had, but for us, it's to preserve the literature of Tolkien. Through the visuals, Middle-earth feels as large and alive as possible, and then it's translated back into its literal form, or we are reminded of the artwork that inspired it. Through this, we learn that there are more stories to tell, more characters to discover, that there are more adventures out there. But it's up to you to take the first step.